Hello and welcome to my Yugioh channel. Today we're going to be looking at the Asian English release of about 200 cards. This is going to be the full list. The design and purpose of this set is to support existing themes that have just come out. For example, we've got new Yugioh support that came out in Infinite Forbidden. We also have new Yugioh support as well as the gimmick puppets. Yugioh, the Ultimate Forbidden Lord, is a level 10 Dart Attribute monster. It's a spellcaster with question mark attack and 0 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand by shuffling all monsters in your graveyard into the deck and cannot be special by other ways. When this card declares an attack, send one monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard. This card gains 1000 attack for each normal monster in your graveyard. If this face-up card would leave the field, banish it instead. If there are 5 different Forbidden 1 cards in your graveyard that was sent there by this card's effect, you win the duel. This is an alternative version and win condition for the Yugioh archetype. It cannot be normal summoned or set, so this is typically a lot of a problem for most players. However, it just requires you to special summon it by shuffling all monsters in your graveyard back into the deck, and there are no other ways that it can be special summoned, so it cannot be revived, it cannot be special summoned by other means from the hand. And in doing so, you're resetting the cards from your graveyard into the deck, which is useful for resource recovery. As soon as this card makes an attack, you send a monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and it gains 1000 attack for each null monster in your graveyard. The more of those cards you can effectively put into the graveyard, the more powerful this card becomes. It does have a downside that if it ever leaves the field, and this is by any other means, it could be by a destruction-based effect or any other form of removal, it gets banished. But provided you can get the 5 different Forbidden 1 cards into your graveyard that was sent there by this card's effect, you instantly win the duel. Now, this is a nice effect as effectively all you need to do is attack with this card 5 times. But since the cards have to have been sent there by this effect, it's not that you can also cheat out that system. You can't use something like Foolish Burial to then send other Yugioh pieces to the graveyard to meet this card's win condition. Obliterate is a continuous trap card. The effect is you can target one monster on the field, send one Forbidden 1 monster or Yugioh card from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and if you do, return that target to the hand. If this card is sent from the spell and trap zone to the graveyard, you can target one Forbidden 1 monster or Yugioh card in your graveyard, add it to your hand. You can only use one Obliterate effect per turn and only once that turn. This is the name of the attack that Yugioh uses. It's used in the first episode of the original series of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, and its effect allows you to just target a monster on the field, so it can be yours or your opponent's, by sending either a Forbidden 1 monster or an Yugioh from the hand or deck to the graveyard. You're able to send that card back to the hand. It can be useful for countering monsters that have been summoned from the extra deck, provided they aren't negated. And if this card is sent from the spell and trap zone to the graveyard, you can take either a Forbidden 1 monster or an Yugioh card in your graveyard, and that can recover back to your hand. It's a decent consistency piece, but it's not that effective. Gimmick Puppet Gear Changer is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 1 with 100 attack and 100 defense. The effect is it cannot be special summoned from the deck. Once per turn, you can target one Gimmick Puppet monster you control, except this card. This card's level becomes the level of that monster. Now, the way that the Gimmick Puppet archetype works is they rely on having mostly rank 8 Xyz monsters. There's several of them. However, they also have one rank 4. Therefore, all of the other Gimmick Puppet monsters are actually either level 4 or level 8. This, I think, is the only exception to that rule, being a level 1, but it's able to copy that other monster's level, so you can either opt to go to the rank 4 or the rank 8. The downside of this ability is it can be quite easily negated. It's not a powerful card, and if you don't have any other monsters on the field, you're going to have to find a way of getting those cards out. Luckily, a lot of the Gimmick Puppets have the ability to special summon themselves through alternative means, and so getting those specific cards isn't that big of a deal. It also cannot be special summoned from the deck, so you're going to have to do it one of 2 ways. Either it's already going to have to be in your hand and you're going to have to summon it through that means, or you're going to have to have searched this out by another card's effect. Gimmick Puppet Egghead is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 4 with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. You can only use the effect of Gimmick Puppet Egghead once per turn. You can discard one Gimmick Puppet monster, then activate one of these effects. Either inflict 800 damage to your opponent, or this card's level becomes 8 until the end phase. The discard effect isn't really too big of a cost, as there are some of the gimmick puppets that are recoverable from the graveyard. There's a couple of the level 8s that can do that. For example, the Drury Doll does that pretty well. There is another one which cannot be destroyed by battle. As soon as you take any sort of battle damage whilst this card's in the graveyard, it revives itself. Those are examples. And either you inflict 100 points of damage to the opponent. The Gimmick Puppet archetype likes to use burn effects as part of a way of chipping out your opponent's life points, but they also rely quite heavily on battle-based damage. Or you can make this card a level 8 monster, and therefore it will help you to go into your rank 8 monsters. Gimmick Puppet Scissor Arms is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 4 with 1200 attack and 600 defense. When this card is normal summoned, you can send one Gimmick Puppet monster from your deck graveyard. This is the Foolish Burial monster for this type of deck. It's a good way of getting rid of certain cards that you can revive much easier from the graveyard than to search or to summon from the deck. Gimmick Puppet Destroy is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 4 with 1200 attack and 2000 defense. Once while face up on the field, you can target one Gimmick Puppet monster on the field, destroy it. When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 or 2 Gimmick Puppet monsters from your hand. Currently, I think this is the only monster that's able to summon up to 2 Gimmick Puppets from the hand at the same point. Most of the others have to have additional effects, which let you summon them, for example, from the hand or from the graveyard. This can be used in a couple of ways. It can be to summon the Gimmick Puppet monsters, so you can actually go into the Link 2 monster that I have, or you can go into one of either the rank 4s or the rank 8 monsters, the ones that require 2 Xyz materials. Gimmick Puppet Humpty Dumpty is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 4. It has 0 attack and 100 defense. When this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon one Gimmick Puppet monster from your hand. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Humpty Dumpty once per turn. As soon as this card is either normal or special summoned, you're able to instantly special summon another Gimmick Puppet monster from the hand. So this can be useful for bringing out either the rank 4 Xyz play or to go into their Link 2 monster. It is only a once per turn effect, but it does provide consistency in helping to summon multiple monsters onto the field. Gimmick Puppet Terror Baby is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 4 with 500 attack and 0 defense. When this card is normal summoned, you can target one Gimmick Puppet monster in your graveyard, except a Gimmick Puppet Terror Baby, special summon it in defense position. You can banish this card from your graveyard. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to the activation of your Gimmick Puppet monster effects this turn. As soon as this card is normal summoned, you're able to take a Gimmick Puppet monster outside of itself from your graveyard, and it gets special summoned. It does have to be in defense position, but that's fine because you can either go into the Link 2 monster or into their rank 4 Xyz monster. By banishing this card, this allows you to use your Gimmick Puppet monster's abilities without your opponent being able to interact with that. I think that's one of the main weaknesses the Gimmick Puppet archetype had. Their boss monsters weren't always that easy to bring out, and even when they were brought out, if they tried to activate their abilities, they would often be stopped and negated and destroyed through that. This provides one other form of protection for them. Gimmick Puppet Drury Doll is a Dart Attribute Machine at type level 8 with 0 attack and defense. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish one other Gimmick Puppet monster from your graveyard, special summon this card. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Drury Doll once per turn. It cannot be used as material for an Xyz summon except for the Xyz summon of a Gimmick Puppet monster. When this card is in the graveyard, just by banishing a different Gimmick Puppet monster from your graveyard, it can be another copy of itself or a different monster, provided it's within its own archetype. This card then gets special summoned. It's a level 8 monster, and I know what you're thinking, 0 attack and defense, not what's so impressive about that. It's often just pitched by the effect of cards such as Scissor Arms to set up in the graveyard, or you can use it from the Egghead's discard ability, do the same thing, and from the graveyard it revives itself for the purpose purely to Xyz summon it into a rank 8 monster. Gimmick Puppet Magnedoll is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 8 with 1000 attack and defense. If your opponent controls the monster and all monsters you control are face-up Gimmick Puppet monsters, minimum 1, you can special summon this card from your hand. It's not that strong a monster, but so long as your opponent has a monster and you have a Gimmick Puppet monster on your field, this card can special summon itself without any additional costs. It's used for the purpose of bringing out one of the rank 8 Xyz monsters. Gimmick Puppet Twilight Joker is a Dark Attribute Machine type level 8 with 800 attack and 1600 defense. When a Gimmick Puppet monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish that monster, special summon this card from your hand. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Twilight Joker once per turn. The reason for this card is it replaces a Gimmick Puppet monster that you control that's been destroyed and sent to the graveyard. Simply by banishing it, you can then replace it with this card, and it can be used to help bring out one of your rank 8 Xyz monsters. The effect is only able to work once per turn, so even if you had multiple in the hand, you couldn't use that off of each and every time one of your monsters happens to be destroyed by battle. Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is a Dark Attribute Machine type level 8 with 1000 attack and 2000 defense. You can special summon this card from your hand by attributing one face-up Xyz monster. You can only special summon Gimmick Puppet Nightmare once per turn this way. When you do, you can special summon one Gimmick Puppet Nightmare from your hand or graveyard. If this card is special summoned, you cannot special summon any monsters for the rest of this turn, except Gimmick Puppet monsters. The design on this card is to pretty much tribute over a face-up Xyz monster. That can be fine if your Xyz monster has used up all of its materials and is no longer useful for you. In that case, you get a free level 8 monster onto your field. As soon as you do that, you can then special summon a additional Gimmick Puppet Nightmare that happens to be either from your hand or the graveyard. That allows you to then go into other rank 8 monsters, but it does lock you into Gimmick Puppet monsters for the duration of the turn. Gimmick Puppet Shadow Feeler is a Dark Attribute Machine type level 8 with 1000 attack and 1000 defense. It cannot be destroyed by battle. When you take battle damage from an opponent's direct attack while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your graveyard in face-up attack position, and if you do, take 1000 damage. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Shadow Feeler once per turn. If this card is an Xyz material and would be sent to the graveyard, banish it instead. This card is meant to be sent to the graveyard to be able to revive itself from there, and it does so provided that your opponent goes into a direct attack on you. It can be a bit risky, but if used correctly and the first time that your opponent goes in for the direct attack, it mitigates damage, because even if your opponent has other monsters on the field, it's not going to do as much damage because it's minusing the 1000 that it has in terms of its attack stat. The card cannot be destroyed by battle, so even if your opponent tries to get over this card, they really can't unless they've got a negation-based effect. It also costs you 1000 life points to use this effect, and so it has to be weighed up how you're going to recover those life points, or are you going to be able to get rid of your opponent's monsters by sacrificing those life points. The downside of this card is when it has been used as an Xyz material and it's been sent to the graveyard, for example, either by the Xyz monster itself being destroyed and sent to the graveyard, or when using its effect, this is banished and makes it more difficult to recover from the cards that already support the Gimmick Puppet archetype. Gimmick Puppet Pistol is a Dark Attribute Machine type level 8 with 1000 attack and defense. You can special summon this card from your hand by discarding one Gimmick Puppet monster. You can banish this card from your graveyard. Your opponent cannot target Gimmick Puppet monsters you control with card effects this turn. The summoning on this card just requires you to discard another Gimmick Puppet monster, and often those cards can be recovered or use their effects from that graveyard. This is also one of those protection style of effects. Just by banishing this card, your opponent is unable to target Gimmick Puppet monsters that you have with card effects for the turn, so it does provide all of your Gimmick Puppet monsters with some form of immunity. Gimmick Puppet Gigantistol is a Dark Attribute Machine type Xyz monster. It's a rank 4 with 0 attack and 2000 defense. It requires 2 level 4 Gimmick Puppet monsters to summon it, and you can detach 2 materials from this card, then target up to 2 monsters your opponent controls, gain control of them until the end phase. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon monsters except Gimmick Puppet monsters, nor declare an attack except with Xyz monsters. You can tribute this card. All monsters you currently control become at level 8 until the end of this turn. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Gigantistol once per turn. This is the only current rank 4 Xyz monsters that they have. I wish they had alternatives, as that would make the deck a little bit less predictable, but the design is very simple to explain. It just needs 2 level 4 Gimmick Puppet monsters, so it does have to be within the archetype itself. By detaching 2 materials, you take up to 2 monsters your opponent controls, so you have a choice, it's either 1 or 2, and you take them until the end phase. From that, you are then locked into summoning into gimmick puppet monsters for that turn, and it also means that any non-Xyz monsters cannot declare an attack. This card can then also be tributed to force all of your monsters to become level 8 to let you go into the rank 8 Xyz monsters. These effects are useful as it's a good way of getting rid of your opponent's threats without having to directly counter them. You're actually taking those cards from them and just stacking them to bring out your Xyz monster. Because they are treated as materials on that card, it's often more difficult for your opponent to then get those cards back outside of getting rid of the Xyz monster first. Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder is a Dark Attribute machine type Xyz monster. It's a level 8, it's a rank 8 with 1500 attack and 2500 defense. It needs 2 level 8 monsters. Up to twice per turn during your main phase 1, you can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 special summon monster your opponent controls, destroy it, then if it was an Xyz monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. It just needs 2 level 8 monsters to bring it out. It is more of a defensive card than an offensive one, as it does have a 2500 defense. Most likely you're going to use it and summon it into defense position, outside of if you can get rid of your opponent's monsters and then go for a direct attack on your opponent's life points. You can use the effect up to twice per turn by detaching a material. You can destroy one of your opponent's special summon monsters, and you get the bonus of inflicting burn damage if those monsters happen to be Xyz monsters. That's a decent effect, but it pretty much relies on your opponent running Xyz monsters. This is why within the anime, Quattro used the field spell Xyz Colosseum, as that forced both Caswell and Bronk into playing their Xyz monsters, as otherwise they cannot attack. It also boosted up their attack points to inflict further damage to them. This is by far the weakest of the various Gimmick Puppet number monsters, and was the first introduced within, I think it was episode 34 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal. Number 40 Gimmick Puppet of Strings is a rank 8 Dark Attribute machine monster with 3000 attack and 2000 defense. It needs 2 level 8 monsters to summon it, and once per turn you can detach 1 material from this card. Place 1 string counter on each face-up monster on the field except this card. Once per turn during the next end phase of the opponent of the player who placed a string counter via this effect, destroy the monsters with string counters, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. This is an upgrade for the original Giant Grinder in that it can impact more monsters. However, it impacts both yours and your opponent's, so if you've got face-up monsters that you don't want to get rid of, it can often be a disadvantage to use this card's ability. The more of your opponent's cards that happen to be face-up, the more effect damage you can do to your opponent, the more you can destroy your opponent's monsters, and the less likely your opponent is going to be able to counteract that. Although, saying it, its effect isn't an instantaneous one. These string counters last for a while, until the end phase of really your opponent's next turn. They can often get out of those monsters by link climbing or synchro summoning or Xyz summoning, and this means those string counters are removed from those cards. I wish there was a design on maybe a continuous spell card or something inbuilt within their field spell which could say that any monster summoned by means of using those cards then gains that string counter, as I believe that's the one way you could mitigate against this disadvantage. Gimmick Puppet of Leo is a Dark Attribute machine type Xyz monster, rank 8 with 3200 attack and 2300 defense. It needs 3 level 8 monsters, and once per turn, if you have no cards in your Spell and Traps card zone, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, and if you do, place 1 Destiny counter on this card. You cannot conduct your battle phase this turn that you activate this effect. When 3 Destiny counters are on this card, you win the duel. This has the ability to win outright for the deck, but it's extremely slow to activate and has many issues with it in terms of protecting it as a monster. First issue is it needs 3 level 8 monsters, so that can be quite a lot of investment for a monster that can be gotten rid of through any other form of effect. You need to have no cards in your Spell and Trap card zone to be able to place a Destiny counter on this card, and you can only generate the number of Destiny counters on it by the number of materials it has. Therefore, if there was a way of cheating this out with fewer materials, you would not then get the full effect of the win condition. Outside of if you have, I think there's a couple of things such as the overlay recharge that allows a material to be reattached to that Xyz monster. It forces you to stop your battle phase the turn you activate the effect, so you can't even deal with your opponent's immediate threats. And when your opponent sees this card, it's quite iconic. They know what you're doing. They can simply read the card and they can get rid of it. Number Chaos 15 Gimmick Puppet Giant Hunter, or as it was referred to in the Japanese anime as Giant Killer, is a rank 9 Dark Attribute Machine type Xyz monster with a 2500 attack and 1500 defense. It needs 3 level 9 monsters, and once per turn you can detach one material from this card, then target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. Then if it was a monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. This is the Chaos form of the Giant Grinder, and it's far more aggressive in its effects. First, its attack and defense points have been switched, so it's now an offensive monster rather than a defensive monster. It needs 3 level 9 monsters, although saying that, you can actually rank up that monster, its original version, to bring this card out, or you can actually just bring it out through other means. A nice thing about this card is that it doesn't need to have its named counterpart, the rank 8 version, the Giant Grinder, as part of its material to use any part of its effect. And by just attaching a material, you're able to immediately destroy a card your opponent controls. It can be a monster, which will be more rewarding as that then inflicts that amount of damage to your opponent's life points, or it can be one of their spell or trap cards, providing you with more versatility. Number Chaos 40 Gimmick Puppet of Dartstrings is a rank 9 Dark Attribute Xyz monster with 3300 attack and 2000 defense. It requires 3 level 9 monsters, and if this card is special summoned, destroy as many monsters with string counters as possible, and if you do, draw one card, then inflict damage to your opponent equal to the highest original attack among those destroyed monsters in the graveyard. Your choice if tied. Once per turn, you can detach one material from this card, place one spring counter on each face-up monster your opponent controls. This Chaos version is intended as soon as it's summoned to get rid of any monster that has a string counter on it immediately without having to wait until your opponent's end phase. The idea is to get the original Gimmick Puppet of Strings, use its ability, then to rank that card up into its rank 9 version, the Dart Strings. That then triggers off the ability immediately to wipe out all of the cards that have the string counter. You get to draw a card and then inflict a certain amount of burn damage. The disadvantage of this is, even though it's much faster, it doesn't have much reoccurrence effect. Neither of its abilities are connected effectively for it, as the first ability lets you simply destroy cards when it's special summoned. Now, really, when this card is already on the field, unless you're sending it back to the graveyard and then reviving it, you're not likely to use that again. And also, to generate the string counters, you need to detach a material from this card in the first place. So even if you were to revive it from the graveyard after properly summoning it, it has no materials. It can therefore not generate the counters. It would have been much better if it had an ability which let it either recover its materials whenever it's summoned again, or to enable you to generate string counters outside of its own effect, and then whenever it's special summoned, have the initial effect to destroy all of those cards. It almost needs its own continuous spell card or an inbuilt into some other card to get the most out of its effect. Number C88. Gimmick Puppet Disaster Leo is a Dark Attribute Machine type Xyz monster. It's a rank 9 with 3500 attack and 2500 defense. It requires 4 level 9 monsters and must be special summoned with a rank up magic spell targeting a number 88 Gimmick Puppet of Leo. Neither player can target this card on the field with card effects. Once per turn, you can detach one material from this card, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. During your end phase, if your opponent's life points are 2000 or less, and this card has no materials, you win the duel. The summon condition on this card is far more specific than any of the other Chaos monsters. They do not require their counterpart cards to bring them out. However, with this one, it needs a rank up magic card, and it has to specifically target your Gimmick Puppet of Leo. It has some form of protection in neither player can target this card on the field with card effects. but it's only a targeting-based effect. If you have anything that's Mass Destruction, Raigeki, Dark Hole, Mirror Force, anything like that, then those cards still apply to this. The ability it has is to inflict 1,000 damage to the opponent by removing a material, and provided your opponent has 2,000 or less life points and this card has no materials, you instantly win the duel. That might seem like a good thing, but this will have 4 materials on it to bring itself out. Even if it doesn't, you do need to force your opponent to have 2,000 or less life points, and so you're going to need additional burn cards to get your opponent down there to meet this win condition. Gimmick Puppet Chimeradol is a link to Dark Attribute Machine Monster. Its link points are the bottom left and the bottom right. It has 1,500 attack, and it just needs 2 machine monsters to bring it out. During the main phase, if you control this link summon card, you can activate this effect. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except Machine Exceeds monsters. Also, take 1 Gimmick Puppet monster from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. Then, if all monsters you control are Gimmick Puppet monsters minimum 1, you can special summon 1 Gimmick Puppet monster from your hand. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Chimeradol once per turn. The summoning on this isn't too difficult, as the Gimmick Puppet archetype relies on machine-type monsters. As soon as this card has been link summoned, and provided it's been link summoned, you're able to take a Gimmick Puppet monster from the deck, and it either goes straight to your hand, or it gets sent to the graveyard. Often it's better in the graveyard as they have recovery-based effects, but there are some that are fine in the hand, as they do just as well in the hand as in the graveyard. You are limited to then summoning for the rest of the turn from the extra deck Machine Exceeds monsters, but that's also fine as it's not so specific, and there are other cards and Exceeds monsters that meet this condition outside of its own archetype. It's not that it's saying you can only summon Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monsters. You're then able to special summon Gimmick Puppet monster from your hand, and this will provide you with the relevant advantage to go into your Exceeds monsters. Junk Puppet is a normal spell card. The effect is to target 1 Gimmick Puppet monster in your graveyard, special summon it. You can only activate 1 Junk Puppet per turn. This is a dedicated Court of Haunted / Monster Reborn for the Gimmick Puppet archetype. It's useful as, outside of many of their own recovery cards, which often have a cost to it, this doesn't have any of those conditions. Provided you've got a Gimmick Puppet monster in the graveyard, you're just able to use it. It is a hard once per turn effect, but that's fine, as otherwise that would be choosing out too much advantage. Puppet Ritual is a normal spell card. The effect is, if your opponent's life points are at least 2,000 higher than yours, you can target 2 level 8 Gimmick Puppet monsters in your graveyard. Special summon those targets. You can only activate 1 Puppet Ritual per turn. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this card. It's great in terms of when you are that much in disadvantage, as it just gives you 3 2 level 8 monsters that have to be Gimmick Puppets from the graveyard, and it's better obviously later down the duel. But the problem is always having those life points for your opponent to be 2,000 or more higher than yours. Often I've played the Gimmick Puppet deck, and it's often been the case that you might not meet those conditions. You draw into this card and it becomes a dead card. It also stops you from going into battle phase that turn. Not so much of a problem for some of the Gimmick Puppet monsters, as they do have their own abilities that destroy other cards, but it can sometimes work as a significant disadvantage, as you can't get rid of immediate threats. Rank Up Magic Argent Chaos Force is a normal spell card. Target 1 rank 5 or higher Exceeds monster you control. Special summon from your extra deck 1 number C or C Exceeds monster that is 1 rank higher than that monster you control. By using that target as material, this is treated as an Exceeds summon. Transfer its materials to the summon monster. When a rank 5 or higher Exceeds monster is special summoned to your field, while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can add this card to your hand. You can only use this effect of Rank Magic Argent Chaos Force once per duel. This is a card which was generated by the Arclight family. Those were the 3 brothers. That was Trey, Quattro, and Quentin, and it was also used by, I believe, his dad, but it was more emphasized on 3 brothers. You get to choose a rank 5 or higher Exceeds monster. I think pretty much for all of them they meet those conditions. Even Trey, being the youngest brother, had a rank 5 at least Exceeds monster. You can then special summon a monster from the extra deck that happens to be a number C or C Exceeds monster. That is a rank higher, and that's pretty easy to do. Those materials get transferred over, so it's just another rank up magic card. And when a rank 5 or higher Exceeds monster is special summoned to the field, Whilst this card is in the graveyard, this can then be returned to the hand, so you can use it a couple of times without having to run dedicated recovery cards. This is a method of bringing out your highest level Chaos monsters without running all these other cards such as Astral Force or the other rank up cards. Condolence Puppet is a normal spell card. Send gimmick puppet monsters with different names from your deck to graveyard up to the number of monsters your opponent controls. That was special summoned from the extract +1. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one Machine Exceeds monster you control. It cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects while face up on the field. You can only use each effect of Condolence Puppet once per turn. This card is designed to provide you with various forms of advantage. The more advantage you get is based on the number of your opponent's special summon monsters that happen to be from the extra deck +1. So if they had a couple of special summoned extra deck monsters, then you could send up to 3 cards from your deck to the graveyard. With their ability to reoccur from the graveyard, those effects can then trigger to bring those cards out. And by banishing this card from the graveyard, you grant your Machine Exceeds monster the ability to be protected from being destroyed by your opponent's card effects. It's a permanent inclusion to protection, whereas the ones for the Terror Baby and another one only provide protection for the duration of that turn. This is one of the later forms of support. It was kind of like a middling form of support that provided the necessary protections to at least keep your number monsters that have to be gimmick puppets onto the field. Perform Puppet is a continuous spell card. You can banish one gimmick puppet monster from your graveyard. All monsters you currently control become at that banished level monster's level until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. If a face-up gimmick puppet monster you control is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can target one of your banished gimmick puppet monsters. Special summon it. You can only use each effect of Perform Puppet once per turn. This is intended to mass level all of your monsters by banishing a gimmick puppet monster. So if you have your level 4 monsters and you've got a level 8 monster in your graveyard, just by banishing it, all of your monsters become a level 8. It's a decent way to bring out the gimmick puppet of Leo, as that requires 3 level materials. It also grants you the opportunity to bring back a banished gimmick puppet monster if one of your gimmick puppet monsters is destroyed by battle or by an opponent's card effect. Therefore, it has recursion and works within synergy between the 2 parts of the effect. One banishes and one can recover when a card has been destroyed from the banished zone back onto the field. Marshalling Field is a continuous trap card. The effect is you cannot special summon monsters except machine type monsters. Once per turn, you can declare a level from 5 to 9. All level 5 or higher machine type monsters you control become at that level. If a machine type exceeds monster you control would be destroyed, you can send this card to the graveyard instead. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one rank up magic Argent Chaos Force from your deck or graveyard to your hand. This is designed to just make all of your monsters a specific level, depending on what you need at that time. Within the gimmick puppets, you want to be calling for level 8, as that will bring out your rank 8 monsters. With the Chronomalies, which is another one which is supported within this archetype, you could call for level 6, level 5, and that'll be fine. And within Quinton, he has the number 9 Dyson Spear, and that's a rank 9 monster. That would work well with that. It also happens to protect your machine type Exceeds monsters by sending itself as the replacement. And when this card is sent from the field to graveyard, so it can be by the secondary part of the effect, or if your opponent just destroys this card, to search for a rank up magic Argent Chaos Force, which will hopefully let you go into the various Chaos Exceeds monsters. Puppet Parade is a normal trap card. The effect is if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, special summon gimmick puppet monsters with different names from your deck up to the difference. Then if your opponent's life points are at least 2,000 or higher than yours, you can set one rank up magic normal spell directly from your deck. For the rest of this turn, after this effect resolves, you cannot special summon monsters except gimmick puppet monsters. You can only activate one Puppet Parade per turn. This is another card which is based on the amount of advantage your opponent has over you. So long as your opponent has more monsters than you do, for example, you have nothing on the field and your opponent has 2 monsters on the field, you can special summon the difference. This means you can then bring out 2 gimmick puppet monsters from your deck straight onto the field with no questions asked. If your opponents then have at least 2,000 life points higher than you, you can set a rank up magic normal spell card, so that will most likely be the rank up magic Argent Chaos Force from the deck onto the field. And since it's just a normal spell card, it can then be activated during that turn. It does lock you into gimmick puppet monsters, but that's because it's part of the archetype. Samsara Dragon is a light attribute dragon type level 1 with 0 attack and defense. This card can be attributed as 2 tributes for the tributes of a dragon monster. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one level 5 or higher dragon monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can tribute summon that monster. You can only use this effect of Samsara Dragon once per turn. This is, for some reason, the ability to tribute for 2 tributes as the summoning of a dragon monster. I think there are a couple of other cards that have similar style of effects, which are based on types. I definitely know there's equivalents for various attributes. This card can then be banished from the graveyard to take a level 5 or higher dragon monster in the graveyard, and it gets added straight to the hand. But when you do that, you immediately after this effect resolves can tribute summon that monster. So it has to go through a couple of different steps. It gets revived from the graveyard back to the hand and then gets summoned from the hand onto the field. At any one stage that can actually be negated, which is the downside on this card. Light and Darkness Dragon is a light attribute dragon type effect monster. It's a level 8 with 2800 attack and 2400 defense. It cannot be special summoned while face up on the field. This card is also dark attribute. Once per chain during either player's turn, when a spell card, trap card, or monster effect is activated, this card loses exactly 500 attack and defense, and that activation is negated. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, target one monster in your graveyard if possible, destroy all cards you control, also special summon that monster if any. This is unable to be special summoned, and the reason for that is it's an omni-negate type of ability. Provided it's already on the field, it's both a light attribute and a dark attribute, and during each chain, so it can be activated multiple times in a turn, so long as your monster has attack and defense points. By losing exactly 500 of those, that effect is then negated. Therefore, based on this card's original stats, this activation can be used up to 4 times whilst it's on the field. Often your opponent is going to want to try and get over this card first by using something like a kaiju to tribute over this before activating any of their abilities. And if this card happens to be destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you're able to target a monster in your graveyard. That card gets special summoned, but also you lose any other monsters you currently have on your field. This is brought out because we have the brand new fusion monster which came out of Infinite Forbidden, which is the Light and Darkness Dragon Overlord. Dark End Dragon is a dark attribute dragon type synchro effect monster. It's level 8 with 2600 attack and 2100 defense. It needs a tuner plus one more non-tuner dark monsters. Once per turn, you can target one monster your opponent controls. This card loses 500 attack and defense, and you send that target to the graveyard. The summoning on this isn't too difficult, as it just needs a generic tuner, but it does need one or more non-tuner monsters that have to be dark attributes. Therefore, there is a limitation into certain decks that work alongside this. Once a turn, you can choose a monster your opponent controls. This card loses 500 attack and defense, and that card then gets sent to the graveyard. That makes it very difficult for any sort of effect to activate, as most monsters have to have been destroyed to trigger off effects, but there are increasingly those cards that have the ability, when they're sent to the graveyard, to still trigger off those effects. This is no longer as powerful as when it was first introduced into the game, but it can use this effect up to 4 times so long as you can keep this around. Light End Dragon is a light attribute dragon type synchro effect monster. It's a level 8 with 2600 attack and 2100 defense. It requires a tuner plus one or more non-tuner light monsters. At attack declaration, if this card battles another monster, you can have this card lose 500 attack and defense permanently, and the monster this card is battling loses 1500 attack and defense until the end phase. The summoning on this is similar to the previous one, but instead of tuner, non-tuner monsters, this focuses on non-tuner light monsters. Similarly, it can be pretty much used in most types of decks. As soon as an attack is declared, this card loses 500 attack and defense, and your opponent's monster loses 1500 attack and defense for the rest of the turn. I know the loss on the opponent's attack and defense is higher, but it's only until the end phase, whereas with this, it's a permanent. So until you can, say, either reset this face down and then bring it, face up again, or you have another means of increasing this card's stats, it can only use its effect 4 times. Madolshi Milfoy is a Earth Attribute Beast type level 3 with 500 attack and a 300 defense. When this card you control is destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or by card effect, and sent to your graveyard, shuffle this card into your deck. When this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one Madolshi monster from your hand. When this card is simply destroyed by either battle or by your opponent's card, and it's sent to the graveyard, it gets shuffled back into the deck. The purpose of this is with the Madolshi archetype, they don't actually like their monsters being in the graveyard. It often makes them weaker or unable to use certain effects. And when this card is normal summoned, you just get to special summon a Madolshi monster from your hand. It can be anyone regardless of the level. Its design is really to increase your field advantage. Battle is a beast type level 3 with 0 attack and a 1800 defense. If this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card by battle or card effect and sent to your graveyard, shuffle this card into the deck. Once returned, you can target one attack position Madolshi monster you control and one face-up attack position monster your opponent controls. If both monsters are still on the field, change them to face-up defense position, and if you do, the ones changed by this effect cannot have their battle positions changed until the end of your opponent's next turn. This has decent defense points for a level 3 monster, and if this happens to be destroyed either by battle or by card effect, it gets shuffled back into the deck. That's the same as most of the Madolshi monsters, as they don't like to be in the graveyard, otherwise that weakens them. Each turn, you can just target an attack position Madolshi monster you have, and a face-up attack position monster your opponent has. Both monsters, provided they're still on the field, get to be changed to face-up defense position. Benefit of this is if the opponent's monster has quite strong attack points and very weak defense points, you actually put them into the weaker zone. And once this happens, those monsters cannot have their positions changed until the end of your opponent's next turn. So it does hard lock those into defense position, making it difficult for your opponent to utilize those cards. Madolshi Crescent is an Earth Attribute Beast type level 3 with 1500 attack and 1200 defense. When this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or by effect, and sent to your graveyard, shuffle this card into the deck. Once returned, you can target one face-up Madolshi card you control, except this card, return it to the hand, and if you do, increase this level by 1 and attack by 300. The Madolshi part of the effect, simply when your opponents threaten this either by battle or by card effect, it gets shuffled back into the deck, the same as the other Madolshi monsters. They do like being in the graveyard, as it then weakens the deck. Each turn, you can target a face-up Madolshi card you control, except this card, so that card gets returned to the hand. It doesn't have to be specifically a monster, it can also be a spell or a trap card. This card then becomes a level 4 as it increases its level by 1, and it becomes a 1800 attack monster. Not bad for what is originally a level 3. Madolshi Hootcake is an Earth Attribute Beast type level 3 with 1500 attack and 1100 defense. If this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, shuffle this card into the deck. You can target one monster in your graveyard, banish it, and if you do, special summon one Madolshi monster from your deck, except Madolshi Hootcake. You can only use this effect of Madolshi Hootcake once per turn. It being a level 3 monster is fine, and the first part of the effect is the same as the other Madolshi monsters. Simply, when it's threatened by either your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard or by battle, this gets shuffled back into the deck instead of going to the graveyard. You can then target one monster in your graveyard and then it gets banished. That's also useful as they just don't like cards in their graveyard. And then you can special summon Madolshi monster from your deck. That doesn't have any restriction as to the level or the attack or defense points of those monsters. It's just any of your Madolshi monsters that you want to bring out. Madolshi Chocolates is an Earth Attribute Beast type level 3 with 800 attack and 1500 defense. When this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or by card effect, and sent to your graveyard, shuffle this card into the deck. Once returned, and when the battle position of a Madolshi monster you control is changed and is now face up. When this card is face up on the field, except during damage step, you can target one monster on the field, change it to face up defense position, and if you do, unless it is the Madolshi monster, it cannot attack. Also, its effects are negated. The first part of the effect is the same as the other Madolshi monsters in that it's if threatened by battle by your opponent's card or by their card effect, this gets shuffled back into the deck instead of being sent there. Each turn when the battle position of the Madolshi monster is changed and is now face up, whilst this card is also face up, you can choose a monster on the field and it gets changed to face up defense position, and that monster can therefore not attack and its effects are negated. So it's a way of shutting down your opponent's cards as well as preventing them from attacking with them. Dolce Chevalier is an Earth attribute warrior type level 4 with 1700 attack and 1300 defense. The effect is when this card is destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or by card effect, and sent to the graveyard, shuffle this card into your deck. Your opponent cannot target face-up Medolce monsters you control for attacks, except Medolce Chevalier. I think this is a decent effect, even though the first part is the same as all of the other Medolces. They just don't like being in the graveyard, and so can be sent back to the deck. It forces your opponent to go for attacks on this card, meaning that until they get rid of this, and this is decent attack for the archetype, none of your other monsters are then threatened for those attacks. Medolce Magellan is an Earth attribute spellcaster type level 4 with 1400 attack and 1200 defense. If this card in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, shuffle this card into the deck. When this card is normal or flip summoned, you can add one Medolce monster from your deck to your hand. The first part of the effect is the same as the other Medolce monsters in that they don't like to be in the graveyard, and so will often shuffle themselves back into the deck. There are easy enough ways for those cards to be searched, so that isn't a concern. And as soon as this card is either normal or flip summoned, you're able to then immediately search for a Medolce monster from your deck to your hand, so it adds to the consistency of that deck. Downside is it does have to search for these specific cards, and those are the points at which this can be negated.